Okay, our next discussion is going to be a panel discussion on a very interesting topic, and hopefully a topic that will generate a lot more questions, a lot more interest, maybe a little bit of heat, a little bit of discussion, which is why it's called a panel discussion. There should be a discussion. If everybody agrees to everything, it won't be a discussion, it will be an agreement. So since it's a discussion, we are hoping there will be some something to discuss, some points of view. The topic is Hinduism and the idea of India. We have Swamiji with us. By now, all of you all know Swamiji. You all have heard him and have listened to him yesterday on Hinduism when he spoke just after David Frawley. So he brought in his views on Hinduism, which were very clear. And you heard him this morning talking about the reason, the explaining why we should invest and why we should learn and why we should imbibe this knowledge and what is the purpose of this knowledge. He also is the founder, let me remind you, of the Arsha Vidya Foundation. But the other guest we have is a very dear friend of mine, and that is his single largest qualification, is Mukund Padmanabhan. Mukund Padmanabhan is a visiting professor of practice at the newly established Kriya University, where he teaches philosophy and related subjects. He was the editor of the Hindu till end of February 2019. That's just now. Before this, he was the editor of a sister publication in the same group, the Hindu Business Line, which is a business paper. He was with the Hindu group for 21 years, before which he worked briefly for the Indian Express in Chennai and the Anand Bazar group in Kolkata. In his career as a journalist, he has written on politics, legal affairs, and the arts, and reported from a number of countries, including Sri Lanka, Nepal, and the UK. Mukund is an MPhil in philosophy and worked briefly as a lecturer in the University of Delhi before switching to journalism. He was an adjunct faculty between 2010 and 2016 at the Ateneo de Manila University in the Philippines, where he taught law and advanced writing to postgraduate students. For the Hindu group, he curates two festivals of the theatre and music, the Hindu Theatre Festival and the Hindu November Fest. He also curates an annual thought conclave on behalf of the newspaper called The Huddle. He is on board of trustees for the CPB Foundation, which runs the Chennai Photo Biennale. So Mukund, to say the least, is a very reputed, established journalist in his own right. And although he thinks he's retired now from the Hindu, all of us at the Hindu do believe that he's very much part of us. And whatever the Hindu is today, a lot of ideas, thoughts have been fashioned by him editing the paper for as long as he did. Well, thank you so much, Mukund, for taking out the time from your schedule. I know you've got lectures almost through the day. You told me you're taking some extra lectures now and some extra subjects. Some professor ran away and you had to fill in for him, etc. So thank you for making the time and agreeing to be in this panel. So I'd like to kick off this discussion by asking each of you, maybe we can start with you, Mukund, on opening remarks on the topic, which is Hinduism and the idea of India. What is your, just when we sent out the topic to you, I'm sure you must have ruminated on the topic or just looked at it, thought about it, etc., etc. What were your initial thoughts when you thought about the topic?
Thank you, Suresh. Just want to say before I start that if someone had told me some time ago that I would be talking at an event to do with Vedic wisdom, I might have, I just wouldn't have been able to believe it myself. I just want to qualify here that I'm only here because the narrative is not about our ancient past, which unlike Swamiji here, who I'm sure is completely well versed with that side, I have to claim I can't make very many claims in that regard, even though I've studied a little bit of Indian philosophy. I just want to say that also that, the principal reason I'm here is you, Suresh, and, And Swamiji, if you've worked with Suresh for about a few months as I have, he's someone you cannot say no to. So, so having, with that little preamble, I'll try and address your question, about the idea of India. There are generally two narratives. One that traces India back to 1947, when we became independent and when we were on our way to becoming a nation state. One in which people have argued that our identities have been forged by the struggle against colonialism, the idea of plurality, of diversity, that are different religious and regional identities in a way were suborned, thanks to the Constitution and the ideas prevailing then, to our national identity as Indians. There is another narrative, and I don't want to labor this and spend too much time, which locates ideas of India, Bharat more than India, and Indianness much earlier, argues that there was a cultural, sort of civilizational identity that undergirded those living in the region for, many years and many hundred years ago. And argues, perhaps not entirely inaccurately, that those who focus only on the first narrative ignore or fail to understand the threads that kept us together, certain, ideational relations in our ancient philosophy. And things that sort of perhaps, if not rigorously defined us, at least, gave us a sort of family resemblance, if you like, which is a word that a Western philosopher called Wittgenstein used. Sort of gave us a kind of resemblance that held us together in the past. And today, what's happened is this kind of, these two narratives are sort of playing themselves out as a kind of conflict. You have people on one side of the political divide focusing on one, you have people on the other side of the focusing on another. And personally, I think India is both a republic and a civilization. We're both a modern nation state. We are a modern nation state, which is possibly superimposed on a very ancient and a very great civilization. And I'm really not sure how much this debate helps to understand us any better. These two, this debate on what is the idea of India and where do you locate it. But I'll say just one thing, since this, is become a contentious issue. Well, no one can deny that this land at one time was a cradle of Hinduism. I think today, any idea of India cannot be defined in terms of Hinduism alone. And I'll end with that.
Swamiji, some opening thoughts on the subject.
Okay, let me start in a lighter vein. What I would like India to be, of course, all that we heard about, militarily strong, economically prosperous, all that. But I always say this, and some of my students are aware of this. I would like to see India that safe, where a scantily clad woman, decked in gold, can walk on the streets of India and be perfectly safe. I don't know whether I'll see it in my lifetime. I've heard of one place like this in the world. And that is the city of Denkali, ruled by the legendary Phantom. But apart from that, okay, I don't want to say Rama Raja was like that. I don't think it was. Okay. But yeah, I agree with Mukund when he says that we have a modern city-state superimposed on an ancient civilization. And therefore, it has its own pulls and stresses. And we have to learn to balance and handle this whole, not avoid a discussion on this, because we have to handle this. Because the pulls and, the question of identity, we don't have. Like you go to States, USA, this is American. We have a way of doing things. Other than having a passport, we are not defined what is an Indian. What is an Indian way of doing it? Is there something Indian? That also we'll have to question. There is something Bengali, there is something Tamilian, there is something Marathi. And of course, there is something Gujarat. But is there something Indian? Are we going to evolve something into that? Or yes, we have to. I think it's high time that after so many years of independence, we look into that issue, not only from a political or a social standpoint, from a lot of standpoints, and see whether something is feasible or not, and how that can evolve.
Okay. The thought of Bengali, you mentioned Bengali and Tamilian and so on and so forth, which leads to me. We claim to be a really secular country, Mukund, right? Are we truly secular? I mean, do we, are we tolerant of every religion, every language? Is there enough of a divide between church and state? I mean, is our country, I mean, we pride ourselves on being the beacon of secularism for the rest of the world. When we look inwards and be honest to ourselves, are we truly secular?
I think the first thing to keep in mind, and the first thing I think that people often forget is we are not secular in the way that some Western countries are. I mean, secularism grew out of the conflict between church and state in Europe, and basically the idea that the state could function free of the influence of religion. And in that tussle, if you like, for influence, there was a compact made between church and state. And the compact between church and state was, there would be a fence and religion would not influence the state. But similarly, and this is what is very important, there would be an autonomous space for religion to function. I think in India, we have adopted, perhaps because of the way nationalist movement, emerged, a completely different idea that we should treat all equals religion, equally. We should have respect for all religions and so on. Now, I find it problematic. I still feel that, this idea of equality can lead to all kinds of issues, which it has in India. It's led to the question as, hey, are you treating us as equally? Are you treating some other religion? And when I'm talking about treating, I'm talking about, the institutions of the state. It could be the judiciary, it could be the government, it could be someone else. So to my mind, I just feel we would have probably been in a better place if we adopted a harder notion of secularism, which kept all religions off from the functioning of the state. But at the same time, and I think this is important, and I think this is what has led to a lot of churning on the religious side, is to provide a certain degree of autonomy and say, look, we're hands off as far as religion goes, unless, of course, it violates some really, fundamental constitutional principle, and we can come to that later. So as a country, we're not hands off. And we haven't been hands-off. And then, this raises questions about, are we equally hands-off and so on. So I think equality that we have built into this idea of secularism, which is a very, very desi idea, has created its own, set of issues that we have come to face.
Yeah. So, Swamiji, what Mukund is basically saying is that, you heard what he said. He said, the secularism, what we are practicing is not the kind of secularism that should have been written for us when it was written by whoever it was written, nationalist movement, and that it should be a more hardline secularism. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with it in a sense that even in olden times, okay, I'm constrained to go to olden times to give an example. There was never a interference of Hindu religion or the Vedic religion into the political space. They were Rajagurus. Okay? But unlike the West, where the church dictated whom the king should marry, what the state should do, the Garajaguru came into question only when there was an ethical issue involved. Like how many hospitals, their ethical committees will have a theologian in it, because there will be certain ethical issues to be considered, and what do they have to say on it? Like I was on the ethical committee in Jaslok in Bombay for 15 years. So that is all the religious leader played in the Indian context. So there was never a real need in India to bring in that type of secularism or separation, because as far as the majority religion was concerned, it was already there. I guess some sort of need was also felt because during the independence struggle, there was also the idea of what they called as the Khilafat movement, or what is known as the Muslim Caliphate in India. So that would be a Muslim state which would govern all aspects of government, like what's happening in many Islamic countries, and how they are also trying to come out of that thing now, right now, including Saudi Arabia, the very leader in terms of Islamic countries, the home of Mecca and Medina. They are also trying to come out of that. And, okay, constitutionally speaking, in one way, yes, that autonomy of the religion should have been equally given to all religions. Because why is the state interfering in religion? So, like if I go to USA and I want to establish an ashram, which my teacher has done, he is given all the rights and responsibilities and the freedom that a church is given. We're very grateful to that. But in India, we have so many of these different religious laws, which creates its own hassles and heartburns among different religions. So in that sense, if we are having a harder secular line that equal autonomy to all religions are equal under the rule of law, I would be the first person to welcome it. Because it's true. You give me the same independence as a mosque is given, as a church is given. Don't have an executive officer on top of what I am supposed to do with my temple. Because you don't have that in the church or a mosque. So give me the same freedom. Why am I, as a Hindu trust or a Hindu religion, like, or a temple like Tirupati Balaji or all the Kerala temples, why does the Devaswam officer have to be an IAS officer and follow the dictates of the government? Yeah, we are open to control under the law of the land. The charity commissioner is there. The income tax laws are there. See that we obey all that. If you don't, put us behind the bars. Fine. If I use my temple or my trust for anti-national activities, put me behind. But the same thing should go for every religion. For every religion. Yeah. So that type of a hardline secularism, I would welcome. Though, when the preamble of the Constitution was written, the word secularism was not there in it. Neither was the word socialism in it. This was introduced by Indira Gandhi in 1976 when she declared a state of emergency. I was a Marine officer at that time. And she declared a state of emergency. All the opposition leaders and half the MPs and MLAs were behind the bars. So already she had a majority, and now because everyone was behind the bars, she had a 2/3 majority. And she introduced, I mean, you don't change the preamble of a constitution, you amend the constitution. But she changed the very preamble itself by putting two words, secular and socialism, into it. So in a way that was illegally done, because the elected MPs were behind the bars. Can you imagine what will happen in this country if any government, especially the BJP government, the NDA government, tries the same thing today, not done. Okay, not done. So, in fact, if BJP tries to do it, I'll be the first to protest as well. Yeah.
So, Swamiji, while completely what you're saying is, we've understood what you're saying, I think Indira Gandhi is a completely different subject. And I remember in one of the programs that Mukund had organized, one of the huddles, we had a complete session on Indira Gandhi and the way and her life and times. I remember it was a 1.5 hour discussion, Mukund, if you remember, on Indira Gandhi and the way she ran the country. Well, she did whatever she had to do, what she thought was the best interest of that country at that time, or her own best interest. But that's what she did at that time. Are we, therefore, my question is coming back, are we now swinging the other way? Because of so many years of appeasement of minorities, etc., being the slogan, are we now swinging the other way? Is Hinduism slowly converting itself into Hindutva? First of all, is there a difference between Hinduism and Hindutva? I believe there is. But Mukund, we'd like to know your point of view. And do you think slowly we are swinging the other way, especially considering the party that's in power, etc.? Are we trying to reclaim what is ours, or are we trying to claim what is everybody else's also in the process? In which direction do you think this movement is going?
Well, I mean, you've asked many questions. I certainly think there's a difference between Hinduism and Hindutva. Hindutva, once again, like any concept, secularism, any concept that we discuss, I think it's important to define, what we're discussing, because these concepts take on different meanings at different times, and they're used differently at times. We know that this concept was used first in Bengal, I think in the 19th century, but really popularized by Savarkar in his book. We know that, it sometimes has it's been interpreted in a very benign kind of fashion. Even Savarkar himself here and there has talked about it as relation to a geography. We have a Supreme Court judgment that goes back to 1996, which also gives it a very, very benign interpretation, saying it's a way of life and so on and so forth. But, and this is a big but, the term itself, terms acquire apart from a literal meaning, they impart an emotive meaning. And this term is acquired in our political discourse, a sort of a meaning that stands for a kind of aggressive, religious-based, ideological, religious chauvinism and religious nationalism. And as long as it has that, and it's used in that, it has that kind of connection, I think we need to be aware of I think A, we need to divorce Hinduism from Hindutva completely. And B, we need to, at least acknowledge that, a term like this could really worry others living in a country like ours. And we live in a country with very, very large minorities and others. So to me, I would, having acknowledged that the word is used, sometimes it's used by the RSS also, they give it a very, very benign kind of interpretation. But you cannot forget that this word has a menacing ring in the eyes of many. And I think we need to know what we're talking about. And if it does stand for a sort of aggressive kind of, Hindu chauvinistic ideology, then it is something to be put down very, very, very firmly, I think.
No, but so therefore my follow-up was that, is that aggression justified? Because we're just reclaiming what we have lost. I mean, so it looks like aggression right now, but is it just reclaiming, or are we actually, trying to, dominate this country? Because there are a lot of Hindus, and rightfully so, who feel because of the years of trying to appeal to minorities, we have sort of lost, forget being a majority, we are not even given, the prominence of a minority.
Yeah, I think it's true. I think they said in Sri Lanka, for instance, that the Sinhalese were a majority with a minority complex. And I think arguably there are sections of Hindus who also feel that they're a majority, but with a kind of minority complex, as if they're being discriminated against. So I would acknowledge that this kind of feeling exists, and I think this is what gives rise to expressions like "let's reclaim what we have lost." I think there's only a certain limit. There's very little purchase in going back into the past, and particularly into the very distant past, and a sense of victimhood. And let's imagine that everywhere where we've seen a sense of victimhood in the world, it is a dangerous thing. Victims, justify all kinds of acts because of their victimhood. So I think it's important for Hindus. I think in this country, by and large, if you take the economic indicators, if you take the social indicators, if you take other indicators, I'm not sure if there is a case for any, terrible grievance. I just think it's important for those who somehow portray Hindus as victims to shake out of it, because I think this is a sort of dangerous idea that victimhood breeds all kinds of dangerous ideas in your head. And it's not just in India, in other countries as well. I mean, there are parts of the Middle East where, people see themselves as victims of all kinds of things, and look at the things that they're up to. So, so to my mind, I don't believe in this idea of reclaiming anything. I think, I think everyone is doing fine in the circumstances. And I think the task should be getting on ahead rather than harping on the past. Lots of things happened in the past. I think we need to acknowledge them and acknowledge them honestly. But we need to understand that people who live today are not present for what happened in the past. I mean, I'm not responsible for the war Ashoka had, for instance. It makes no sense. How far back are we going? So, I mean, it's like, are we going to blame the Germans forever for World War II? I think we just need to get on with it. So, I think sometimes this idea of getting on with it and forgetting the past is not something that appeals to a certain, a certain section of the political class, unfortunately.
So Swamiji, Mukund is clearly saying there is a distinct difference between Hinduism and Hindutva. He's saying Hindutva, while it has been described as benign in many ways, he believes has an edge to it, and that edge is a slightly aggressive edge, the word. And he also doesn't believe in this reclaiming bit. He says that, let's get on with it. So
I got that.
So
I do have something to say on that. I think partly the problem with the word Hindutva is who first used it.
Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, right? Was it?
It was Chatterjee. It was not even Veer Savarkar who used it. Okay.
Yeah.
But it is associated with Savarkar more than anyone else. And if you really look at the word, looking at the two ways, one is by abuse of the word, one is by use of the word. Hinduism is anglicization of the word Hindu, because you made an ism out of it. The Sanskrit version would be Hindutva. Hindutvam, if you are rooting it as an object, or Hindutva, the status or the qualities or the whole about being a Hindu. That is why the Supreme Court interpretations, etc., are very benign. Now, why did it gain an edge? Because certain people who were trying to correct certain historical wrongs use the word Hindutva. And believe me, it's the media who jumped on it and gave it that edge. I accept. The people who demolished Babri Masjid use that word Hindutva. I accept that. If that was wrong, that was wrong. In terms of the demolition I'm talking about. And we are all ready to move on. But the problem here is, you said yourself, let us acknowledge the past and move on. Ever since independence until recently with the Supreme Court judgment, there never has been an acknowledgement of the destruction that was brought in India by foreign invasions. There is only glossing over because you're going to hurt the minority community. When the former Prime Minister goes on record and saying the Muslim community has the first right on the resources of this country, whereas as a Prime Minister, he should have said, every Indian has a claim on the resources of the country. But when such statements are made, when the very act of demolition of an Ayodhya temple in the past, in spite of archaeological evidence, is being repeatedly denied by whoever you want to call it, the liberals, the leftists, the political section of the political class, the Congress and its allies, when repeatedly it is being denied, when the inquisitions in Goa are denied, when the atrocities of Tipu Sultan has been denied, when every king, Aurangzeb's atrocities against the Sikhs in particular, how many Sikh gurus were killed, they are being denied. Where is the acknowledgement of the past and moving forward? Of course, I'm willing to move forward. Acknowledge that these things happened. Take 1 or 2 steps to correct it. One, symbolic correction, like what's happening in Ayodhya. But the whole world is against it. They actually wanted to reopen the Ayodhya case through the back door. Where is the acknowledgement of the past? Where is the acknowledgement of what Hindus have suffered? There is no acknowledgement. How can in your personal life, if a wrong against you has been acknowledged by you and others, it's easy to move on. If that wrong has not been acknowledged, believe me, that sense of hurt can be exploited by anyone and everyone, positively or negatively. So this acknowledgement that you speak about is being regularly denied. Therefore, Hindutva seems to be aggressive. What are we reclaiming? We are reclaiming our heritage. Is this wrong in that? Does Indian history start only with the Mughal invasion? Does Indian history start only with Alexander's invasion of India? Or do we acknowledge that we are an ancient civilization? Even that is being denied. Even that is being denied by saying Indians were civilized by the Aryans coming in. Every American historian has denied that. Only the British historian sticks to it. And the JNU historians stick to it. That theory. All the American historians who are more neutral, they have junked that idea. So where is the acknowledgement of us? Where is the acknowledgement of our heritage? It's also interesting. Indian students going abroad, they were found to have a low self-esteem in spite of being very good academic performers. And I have a theory about it. I mean, it's up to some sociologists to test it out. Because as a personal level, if I don't own up my past, I cannot have a healthy self-esteem. This is psychologically proven by enough psychological research on it. Similarly, as a nation, if we as Indians do not acknowledge and own up our history, our heritage, no Indian is going to feel good about ourselves. Macaulay's speech in the Parliament 1837 is available in the archives of how we wanted to change the whole education system so that we will not be proud of anything Indian. It's available in the archives. He did a damn good job for Britain, not for us. As a conquering country, he did a damn good job. Very good job. Hats off to him. Because he was a British. He did what's good for Britain. What's wrong in that? As far as he's concerned. The wrong is for us. It's for us to correct it. It's for us to set the record straight. It's for us to own up our heritage and say, hey, We have something to be proud of in the past, and we'll take it forward and have a lot of things to be proud of in the future. Let's move on. But acknowledge. If acknowledgement is not happening, difficult.
No.
This violence will keep happening. Riots will keep happening. And I'm afraid. I don't like it. I have, during from 93 onwards, wherever there has been riots in Bombay, I have gone about trying to keep peace in the society. Personally, at personal risk to myself, I have done this. And I will still do it. I'll still do it. I will not hide behind my robes or my age. But fact is a fact. This will keep happening. If I don't acknowledge that and say, yeah, wrong things happened, the Muslims of today are not responsible for that. Let me make this also clear. The Muslims of today do not have to apologize for what their ancestors did. But the country as a whole has to acknowledge what happened. In your own words. Acknowledge that. We are all happy to move forward.
You know, Swamiji started his speech. One of the first things he said was he put a fair amount of blame at the doorstep of media when he started. Right? His first statement was, you know, media is also partially or reasonably responsible for this.
I did that.
So here's something, Mukund, right up your alley, and something that you, I'm sure, will have a very strong point of view on is, you know, if you ask people around now, seriously, if you tap a man walking on the road and tap his shoulder and ask him about media, there was a time when media was respected as the fourth estate. And it truly was, I believe, it truly was, at least in our country. But it is slowly becoming the joker in the pack. Seriously, you look at any politician, you look at anybody, everybody points a finger at media and says media is responsible for this. This is trial by media. This media is doing this. Therefore, media seems to have lost the high ground on credibility, on authenticity, on facts. All this seems to have disappeared out of the window. So, on the question of reclaiming, right? Since the theme seems to be reclaiming, and I introduced the theme, you think media at some stage should take a serious look at itself and reclaim what was there? It was. Clearly, I remember in my growing up time, you read something in the newspaper, you believed it blindly. There was no question, right? So,
totally. I would agree with that. I started reading the paper when I was 9 years old.
Correct. So,
62 over.
So tell us, as a person who spent a large amount of his time in media and is proud to be a media professional, how do you believe in the fact that the credibility of media has got eroded over the last few years in India? And second, what do you think media should do?
Well, two things. I'm not sure how proud I am to be a member of the media in this climate, or I've been very disillusioned with the functioning of the media. And which is why I think I feel I'm in a much happier and better place in the academic world than I was in the media. I was getting a little frustrated with the way things were going. But to your larger point, yes, I agree. I mean, I also grew up as a journalist. The kind of respect that people had for the media has vanished. The kind of tolerance people had for the media has also vanished. I mean, the term prostitute was invented by someone who was a minister in the government. So there's that as well on that side. But this kind of description, why has it come to such a pass? Is the media alone to blame for this or not? And, I think the answers are probably too complex to sort of lay out in the form of a quick answer. So I will try to be brief, and if this abridges or is sort of the truth in some way, or doesn't convey my thoughts entirely, then I apologize. But I think there are two reasons for this. One is we have moved to an age where communication has become more and more instantaneous. I mean, we moved from newspapers, we moved from probably, monthlies to dailies to, the Hindu was not a daily when it was launched in 1878. So we moved to dailies, then we moved to, television, we moved to now the world of the internet. News is instant right now. And I think what has happened in this world of instant news is we've empowered everybody to become a journalist. So I know you'll think, I'm blaming the social media for the ills of journalists, but I think the social media has revolutionized the way that news is consumed. And it's also, I think, made traditional media houses adopt very extremely bad practices in the way they function. And I think this has been responsible for it. For instance, everybody has to be quick first with the news. You have to break news first, otherwise you're lost. You have to write a headline with some kind of twist so that otherwise somebody won't click on it. It's no longer, headlines no longer are written for the truth. They're written because of how many people will click on it. In fact, there's one newspaper in America that actually puts 17 or something headlines for every story and then puts it out in different parts. And if headline number 3 gets the most hits, that becomes the headline for the internet space. So, I mean, I think the social media has created all kinds of bad practices. And I think that these bad practices have been adopted by the liberal media. And I think not the liberal media, sorry, the traditional media, the legacy media. And I think this has been a part of the problem. One of the things that's happened is we had a clear wall at one time between news and opinion. I remember traveling. The Hindu was not a paper that was particularly liked by, or at least not liked. It was a paper that was not particularly, people didn't agree with it if you were from a particular party and so on. And as a reporter, I've gone to Karnataka during the election, met many people from the RSS and the BJP. But they would always have that respect, saying, look, we respect you because there was a wall between your news and your opinion. And I'm not talking about the Hindu here particularly, but I think what's happened overall, even if you read the New York Times and the Washington Post, is that wall between news and opinion has been gradually got eroded. And, we got digital websites where everything is a slant. Everything is a point of view. And unfortunately, it looks like this is the kind of stuff that people want to consume. So I completely agree with you. I think the media has lost its moorings. I think part of it has to do with collapsing models that we have. Financial models are not working. So they're desperate to do something. I think a lot of the reason is the blame needs to be put at the media's doorstep. But at the same time, a lot of it has to do with technological developments. I'll just make one more point. There is a common kind of belief that, hey, we are so polarized today, which is reflected in the media also, because there's polarization happening in the real world. And the social media and everything else, the media is only reflecting that polarization outside. But, and I won't labor this, there are increasing number of studies, academic, otherwise, to show that the social media actually divides people. It creates polarization. One good example is the experiments conducted by this New York professor called Cass Sunshine. You put 6 people with the same views in one room and have them talk on one issue for 1 hour. 2 of them will come out much more extreme than before. So the very act of creating echo chambers, creating this, just polarizes people. So I think we need to look at the media in a slightly greater, at a slightly larger and a slightly more holistic fashion. It's not that the media has suddenly become corrupt or all of us have just turned bad. All of us have been exposed to various forces that have led to this situation. But to your question, yes, the media has lost the respect that it had. And yes, I don't think it's doing its job as well as it should.
At least 7 times I counted, Swamiji, Mukund used the word polarization in this answer that he gave on media. So polarization seems to be a worldwide phenomenon. over the last few years. If you look at a lot of the world leaders who have come into power over the last few years, it's been world leaders who polarized the nation, right? Or who have come on the strength of polarization, where a particular set of people have voted for them and brought them into power, right? So what is it that has changed in the narrative? What is it that has changed in the human emotion that today in the last few years, we are supporting leaders who are driving a polarization agenda, or who are seeming to drive a polarization agenda across the world? And India is no different, but I'm saying India is not unique either across the world. So what is this phenomenon happening across the world that people are feeling that, no, I want to support this man who's polarizing the country? Why is this happening?
Okay, let's put it like this, especially in the Indian context. There is a narrative that's going on from independence onwards. Here comes a group of people who wants to change that narrative. So the very fact that they want to change the narrative is being opposed and saying, how can you change the narrative? Why not? You're telling a story, and I find loopholes in that story. I find holes in that story. I want to set it right. I want to bring my perspective into it. So the very act of me going against the established view itself creates some amount of conflict, some amount of friction, which can be healthy because something better can emerge. If the discussion is good, if the debate in the public space happens well, something very positive can emerge out of it. But like how it happened in India. So there was so much of talk of polarization after the Gujarat riots. For example, I, who used to trust the media 20, 30 years back. In fact, I remember when I was living as a sadhu in Rishikesh, as a bhikshu, we didn't have the money to buy the paper every day. Because I'm living on alms. Where is the money to buy a paper? I'm living on alms. I get 1 rupee, 2 rupee, 3 rupees, which was big amount those days. Because 50 paise, I could get a cup of tea at the proper tea shop. I used to save that money and spend 5 rupees to buy in India Today. Because it is a monthly with news analysis. So that I would be in touch with what's happening in the other world, not only in the sadhu world. So from someone like that, why don't I trust? Because I don't trust the media now. Previously, I knew I could open the Times or the Hindu and I could say what they're reporting is fine. So when I heard all this polarization in Gujarat, that time I was still in white, I had not yet worn saffron. Yeah. I said, let me travel and see. Let me go to all these areas where the riots have happened. And I was in white. I have a beard. If I reveal my Rudraksha, I'm a Hindu. If I don't, I can pass off from any community. I just have to change a little bit of the style of language I speak. That's all. And I actually traveled. And the polarization was more in the minds of certain social activists, certain media people. The common man, even those who had suffered, they told me, Bhaiya, hone dena ye sab ho gaya. This in Hindi, This happened, certain things happened. We did something wrong, they did something wrong. Let us move on. So at the ground level reality, I went, I traveled, I checked up by local buses, ST buses, and patpatis and tuk-tuks. I traveled all over on foot. They said, let me see. The media is claiming this. Let me see how much of polarization is there. Look at the common man. Look at the guy who does business. All communities are interacting in business very nice. I'm talking the Indian context, okay, first. So there is a certain amount of polarization. Nobody is saying no. Why? Because suddenly a very passive community, the Hindus, have not started saying, hey, come on, enough is enough. Now we are going to do something. Now we want to demand for what is ours. Now we're going to ask for our rights. We're not going to be taken for granted. We need a political space. So naturally it'll create a disturbance. How will it not create a disturbance? Because you're challenging status quo. That is not polarization. That is not polarization. I don't think our politicians are all that polarized. You look at when some political leader's child gets married, what happens? The whole crowd is there. Everybody is there. Very friendly terms. So, to a certain extent, yeah, it won't be there because the status quo is being challenged. How can it not be there? You're challenging the status quo, no? And you're blamed for changing the narrative. Of course, narrative is being changed. We want to change it. You had a right for a narrative. We have the right to change. You need not agree with me. I need not agree with you. Does not the Indian democratic space have place for both of us? What is the problem in that? But polarization. These people are responsible for polarization. You call somebody a chaiwala and a mouth ka saudagar and saying he's polarizing. Huh? You're abusing the elected PM of the country and you're saying he's polarizing. Let me make it clear, I'm not a Modi bhakt. Okay? I think in the given conditions, he is the best available. Yes, in the given condition. Not more than that. So I think in India, this is where the whole thing about polarization is coming up. Yeah. And the so-called Hindu parties are claiming certain things. And that is polarization. But when a Muslim leader, upcoming Muslim leader, in Hyderabad says, you remove the police and you will see what happens to the Hindus in India. That is not polarization. Who's responsible? He actually said that. It is there. Records of that thanks to the modern media. Video recordings are available. Where he actually said it. You remove the police force and you will see what happens to Indians. So who's responsible for the polarization? Someone who makes a comment like that? Or someone who says, hey, these historic wrongs have happened and we need to correct them all. This is the Indian context. I guess globally, with goods and traffics moving across, human resources moving across countries, there is always a case, like it happened in Maharashtra also, that people from outside the state or outside the country come and get employment. And the locals lose their jobs. And there is a resentment. That resentment can be exploited by any leader. I think President Ford Jr., when he ran the elections, there were images of the wolf at the door. We are blaming Trump and there is a lot to be blamed for him to be blamed for. I agree with that. I agree with that. But what about that? What Ford did? All those electoral images of the wolf at the door in his propaganda. That's worse, actually. This guy is a buffoon. But he strikes the chord in some people. Because there is that feeling that we are losing our jobs without examining why they are losing their jobs. Like how it happened in Maharashtra with the Shiv Sena movement, etc. The same thing happened. They used to call the Madras Bombay Express the Stenographer's Express. I mean, I grew up with hearing all this, okay? The stenographer express, because loads of South Indians would come to Bombay and they're all very good at English and stenography, and they would get jobs. And the local Maharashtrian who had not bothered to study English is not getting the job. But without examining, the same things happen in the States.
Mukund, what's your take on polarization and why it's happening?
In a way, I mean, if the Swamiji is suggesting that we need to broaden our definition of polarization, I have, on a theoretical level, no issue with that, because I think any form of identity politics risks polarization, and that's the point he was trying to make. It could be over jobs, it could be over, it could be over caste, it could be over something else. So why isn't a caste party not polarization? So, I mean, my response to that is, I think, maybe we need to define polarization in broader terms than just religious polarization. But to my mind, still, that would be the biggest issue that faces India today. But I take the point that, there can be other kinds of polarization, which is what he's pointed to. And maybe we don't talk about those forms of polarization as much as the others. So to that extent, yes, I agree. But I personally think that any kind of identity politics is something that this nation should really, be concerned about. Whether it's regional identity or whether it's caste identity or whether it's religious identity. So I will not, I think he was referring to a Hyderabad politician. Yeah, I grant that, that there is religious identity politics being played out by him, and we've seen it over and over again. But this doesn't justify some other religious identity politics being played. I think ideally what we have, and I think this is where I think the left and the liberal, I've always been very, very opposed to this hyphenation between left and liberal, because I think you can be left or you can be liberal. And if you're liberal, you basically have to have certain values like being tolerant of other views, at least, or willing to embrace other ideas, at least in principle. So I wouldn't like to say left liberal once, but I think this lot that we describe as left liberal, I think maybe they have been, extremely, or they close their eyes to certain kinds of identity politics simply because they believe that this is, a dispossessed caste or a disadvantaged caste or something else. And so they sort of affirm certain kind of casteist politics, which I think hasn't helped the overall cause, which I think should be to eschew all kinds of identity politics in India. I think if you asked in the beginning about, I think Swamiji also spoke about a vision of India, and he talked about what he would want. I think if we live in an India which eschews all kinds of identity politics, we will be in a better place. I mean, somebody is going to turn around and say that this is a terribly outdated or a terribly elitist idea that we live in India. The reality is we are driven by caste, there's oppression, blah, blah, and so on. But at least that should be the aim that we should work towards. And I'm not entirely sure whether, a certain kind of politics has actually helped to alleviate the situation or reduce religious polarization or actually only increase it. So to my mind, or caste, politics, whether it's actually reduced the, help to ameliorate this issue or actually just entrenched it. And I'm not sure which one is true, but I think, we should be clear about our aims, which is to work, to distance ourselves from a sort of identity politics. And the left embraces a kind of identity politics because, for them, they have this notion of classes and this. I mean, it's founded on a kind of identity politics. So in my mind, I think we need a politics that stands for everybody, all Indians as one. I think we need to push that kind of politics further. I'm not sure whether any party represents that today, honestly and entirely. They might claim to. The major nationalist parties do claim to do that. But in the way that it manifests itself on the ground, it's flawed. But I think that's what we should work towards.
Okay. Can we take a couple of audience questions, Mukund?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
One statement. I think I agree with Mukund that because some 30 years ago, I had an interaction with a group of Bangladeshis who came here. This was 25 years ago, not 30, 25 years ago. And someone asked them a very interesting question. I mean, I was very popular with them because they knew I had a hand in the 71 war, a small role. So for me to gain acceptance with them, the moment they discovered that, I am, one of them, like, we owe you. It was like that. I said, no, you don't owe me. We did what we had to do. But one person asked him a very interesting question. He said, you're a Muslim country, but everything is going very smooth in your country. There is no problem of those days. Now there is. But those days, it had not yet become a Muslim country. It is still a secular country. Those days, how come there are no problems? So this young girl, she was a kid, but she gave a very beautiful answer. He said, yes, we are Muslims, but we are Bangladeshis first. So I think if every Indian thinks that, yeah, I'm a Hindu, I'm a Muslim, I'm a Sikh, I'm a Parsi, I'm a Christian, I'm whatever. I'm a Maharashtrian, I'm a Gujarati, I'm a Mallu, I'm a Tamil Nadu, I'm Bengali, but I'm Indian first. If we can get that national sentiment into it, through the political leaders, spiritual leaders, media leaders, whatever it takes to define what is Indian and make what is Indian. If we can do that, everything else will become subservient to the Indian cause. I think that will be beautiful.
Thank you, Swamiji. Thank you, Mukund. Can we take a few questions? Just a couple of questions. I know we're running out of time, so I won't take too many questions. Mukund, this is, I think is directed at you. It doesn't mention it, but I suspect it is. It's saying, how dangerous is foreign ownership of Indian media to the country's independence? At one time, foreign ownership, even partial, was not prohibited. Can the problems of the Indian media be traced to biased ownerships?
No, I really don't think it can be traced to biased ownership. Right now there are restrictions on how much FDI can come in depending on the space, and control is still under the law very much in Indian hands. So the foreign media is not that interested or foreign investment is not that interested in coming into the media at this time. But I'm not really sure whether whether the issue of whether this foreign money can come in and change the character of the media. I don't think that's the real threat. I think the threat we're facing is just a collapse of the revenue model. A total, the world has changed. Newspapers, magazines, television channels are not making the kind of money they make. Everything has gone online. A lot of it is available free. Google and Facebook have become the major media players. And so this is a media that is struggling to find its financial feet. And as it struggles to find its financial feet, it's making more and more and more compromises. Suresh and I were on different sides of the divide when we were in the Hindu. His job was to get revenue for the company. My job was to, it might sound high sounding, was to protect the sort of editorial values of the paper. So sometimes there would be issues about, hey, but, finally we are a business and we need to also survive. So there are tensions of that kind. But all I'm trying to say is that today there are certain things that the media does which have become all right, which would be unthinkable 10 years from now. I mean, the New York Times does it, the big newspapers in the West does it. There's this thing called native advertising, which is a form of just writing that comes in. 10 years ago, if someone had peddled this idea of native advertising, it would have been thrown out of the window. Today, it's the norm, and it's accepted by very, very reputable media houses abroad. So sometimes when you're weak and when you're vulnerable and you're struggling to survive, you make all kinds of compromises. And I think in India, we made this kind of compromises. I think a shot of foreign investment is not going to change the character, make us any worse or make us any better. But I don't think that's going to come simply because the rules are written up in such a fashion that it's not worth anybody's worth putting money here, because the media is anyway in such a bad space. And even if he puts money here, he's not going to control anything. It'll still remain a sort of desi operation.
Thanks, Mukund. Swamiji, there's a gentleman who's asking us, is there really a Hindu renaissance happening right now? I spoke about reclaiming, he's talking about renaissance, or is it just another passing phase of Indian polity? I mean, it is just a political party using this card to stay ahead of the game. What is it according to you?
I think the Hindu renaissance in modern India started from the likes of Swami Vivekananda, etc. onwards. It's not something new. When we were under foreign rule, there were so many things we couldn't do. So when that went off, and even towards the end of the British, like where Swami Vivekananda and all came into the picture, there was a renaissance there. And that was one generation. Then Swami Chinmayanji and etc. was another generation. Then Swami Dayananji, Swami Akhandananji, etc. Chinmayanji, Karapatraji, etc. in terms of Hindu Renaissance, they were. Then Swami Dayananji and all. Another generation. Now it's our generation. So that in terms of Renaissance, understanding a more healthier, broader understanding of what Vedanta is, what our roots are, I think is important for everyone to be in touch with their roots. You cannot deny your roots and try to build up a future. The person who wrote the script for the Mahabharata, I think Raza, even the media should know more about it than I do. He made a very, very beautiful comment. He said, I'm a Muslim, but I see myself as a Hindu Muslim because my ancestors are Hindus. Today, if he makes that statement, he'll get stoned. But he was speaking the truth. So I really don't look at the Muslims as something foreigners. There are brothers. They chose a separate religion. But can we acknowledge our common past, our heritage? If we can do that, that's what Renaissance is about. And of course, the learning that has to happen, where it is not that the Renaissance started, our effort of the Renaissance started with Vedic Wisdom Festival. Yes, that is a new dimension we are given to it. I was organizing my teachers.
Why do you say they don't?
Yeah.
Sorry, can I ask a question? Why do you say that they don't acknowledge the common past? I mean, if we look at, say, Java in Indonesia, it is so
they do
hybrid, the culture. It is hybrid in certain parts of India as well. I mean, why do you believe that Indian Muslims are not?
Because it is not the problem of the average Muslim. Average Muslim, the problem doesn't exist. I know, because I have a lot of Muslim friends. I have Muslims that are coming to my class. Can you imagine that? And I say, be quiet about it. Don't disturb your religion at home. I say that. You have your learning, you have your growth. Don't disturb the family set up with all this? Because this is a bit disturbing for them. Why? Because their mullahs brainwashed them with it. Have you not seen it happening? I've seen it happening in my days. I used to do a lot of rural development work at a place called, and I used to use the small town of Danu as a base. My friends were running a hospital there. I had taken them there for the hospital. And I used to use that as a base and do a lot of rural work. So I had some Muslim friends in Danu. So for every Eid, I would be there at their place. I would be there at the place for Eid to celebrate it together. Then a mullah came there and he said, nowadays, from now on, Eid will be at the mosque, not in your houses. So the man came and said, I says, we have this problem. What to do? I said, no problem. We'll meet the next day. I'll come the next day after Eid. So the next year, the mullah made it 3-day celebrations. I said, no problem, Baba. I come every weekend here. No? The next weekend. Then the mullah raised it to 1 week celebrations. He just wanted to keep us out. Now, and the community, the moderate voice of Islam is not being heard. If that is heard, or if they make an effort to make themselves heard, like how we are making the effort to make the moderate voice of Hinduism to be heard. If that is done, there'll be no problem in India. But now the political discourse and the functioning is in the hands of whom? The Muslim voice is not the moderate voice, sorry. It's Owazi.
Is the Hindu voice the moderate voice? People like Yogi Adityanath, would you call them moderates?
Adityanath may say a few things which is problematic, but I know the guy well. It is functioning. The Muslims are running his ashram. They are Muslims in his ashram. And they all happily get around together. Because I know these people personally. I always make it a point to double check things personally as far as possible. There are certain things you can't check personally. Yeah. If it's a government secret, you can't check it personally. Though I do have a few contacts with, but security clearance, etc. can be an issue. But as far as possible, I'll try to check up myself and I'll check these things out. So that's what we are trying now. Why do you think we're having a festival like this and raising these issues? Let our voice be heard. Let us not be drowned out in the political slogan. No, it should be heard. Yeah, I'm assertive about being a Hindu, definitely. I wasn't before. I was as an brainwashed guy because of my Western education and everything. But I started looking into the whole thing. I said, if I'm going to be a liberal, I must see the whole picture. I can't go unidimensional. That's not liberal in the true sense of the word. Then when I felt there's so much of richness here, I must go more into it. And I went more into it. Until everything else disappeared, this became the main thing. Yeah, so let our voice be heard. We are making an attempt at least.
Thank you, Swamiji. Thanks, Mukund. I think we have overshot our time marginally, but I think the discussion was so interesting and so intriguing to hear several points of view on the same subject. I think we all didn't look at the clock, which is very good. Mukund, I remember when I first told you that we were going to discuss for an hour, you raised your eyebrow and you said, 1 hour? What are we going to talk for an hour? You remember? So I think 1 hour has flown by and slightly more. I think because the topics were so interesting and the views were, I won't say vastly different, but yes, you had a different take on the subject. Swamiji has a different take on the subject. I didn't have any take on any subject, which I usually don't have. But I think overall, I think it was a very wonderful discussion. Thanks, Mukund, so much for airing your point of view without fear or favor and really bringing a focus into the discussion. Your journalist background, of course, helped you tremendously in handling this. Best of luck with your teaching. I will not, the fact that you said that you were a little disillusioned with the media today leaves me a little scared because I'm still in the rat race. But yes, one day I shall also become a professor and say I'm disillusioned with media, I'm sure. But for now, thank you so much, Mukund. for your time, effort, thoughts, views. Swamiji, thanks for your strong views on Hinduism and its renaissance and what's happening in our country and abroad. And yes, Swamiji.
I'd also like to thank Mukund for being here.
Yeah.
It's great to have you here, sir.
Yeah.
Very well articulated.
Sometimes it's, we live in a space where we can't discuss issues with people that we have differences with. And I'm sure I had some differences with, things you said, and I'm sure you had many differences with what I've said. And I think it's just important to keep the conversation going. And I think that's something that we've forgotten to do in this day and age. So thank you, Suresh, for putting this together. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Mukund. It was a pleasure to host you. Thank you so much.